What if the most intimate space you possess, your own mind, is not entirely your own? What if the thoughts you think, the choices you feel you make autonomously, are the product of a sophisticated, invisible architecture? Welcome. We are here to do more than just listen. We are here to dissect, to question, to unravel. We begin with a conversation about the tools of influence, framing, priming, and narrative. But we will not merely observe them. We will turn these tools back on themselves. We will employ the Socratic method, the art of asking disruptive questions, to expose the logical machinery that so often goes unchallenged. Our goal is not to tell you what to think, but to give you the means to discover how you are being persuaded. Let's begin. The dialogue begins with the simplest of points. An 80% success rate feels different from a 20% failure rate. This is framing, a classic and potent tool. But let's ask a Socratic question of this. If two statements are factually identical yet provoke opposite emotional reactions, what does that say about the relationship between fact and truth? Can something be factually correct but fundamentally misleading? This is not an abstraction. This is the bedrock of modern propaganda. It rarely lies outright. It simply frames. Then we have priming, the constant low-grade drumbeat of headlines about security threats, economic collapse, or cultural decay. This isn't an argument. It's psychological preparation. It's setting the stage so that when a solution is presented, often one that demands sacrifice of liberty or capital, it feels not just reasonable but necessary. The logical fallacy at work here is often an appeal to fear, argumentum ad metum. The priming creates an irrational fear which is then used as the logical basis for a policy or product. The reasoning is circular. Be afraid because of these headlines, therefore you must accept this solution to alleviate the fear we just stoked. And this all culminates in narrative. The weaving of facts, half-truths, and emotional hooks into a compelling story. Good versus evil, freedom versus tyranny, the past versus the future. The fallacy here is often a false dilemma, false dichotomy. The narrative presents a complex, multifaceted issue as a simple binary choice. You are either with us or you are with the enemies of progress. By simplifying the world into a story, it makes critical thinking seem complicated, cynical, and unnecessary. Why analyze when you can just choose a side? Here, the conversation touches on something profound. The idea that language doesn't just describe reality, it creates it. The concept of a carbon footprint existed before the phrase, but the phrase brought it into public consciousness and made it a thing to be managed, measured, and notably, individualized. Let's apply the Socratic method. Who benefits from the term carbon footprint? Does it focus our attention on systemic corporate pollution? Or does it deftly shift the burden of responsibility onto individual consumer choices? The very term frames the problem and its solution in a specific way that benefits certain actors. This is what the philosopher John Searle called an institutional fact. A $20 bill is a piece of paper. Its value is a collective agreement sustained by language and story. When that story breaks down, the value disappears. So what other realities do we take for granted that are built on this same shaky foundation of collective story? National borders? Social hierarchies? The very concept of money? How stable are they really if their existence is contingent on our continued belief in the story? The dialogue brilliantly uses Edward Bernays as a case study. He was the master who understood that control doesn't come from force, but from perception. His Torches of Freedom campaign is a masterpiece of manipulative framing. But let's highlight the fallacies he employed. Appeal to false authority. Using a doctor's survey to endorse bacon, creating the illusion of scientific consensus for a commercial product. Association fallacy. Linking cigarettes to the noble concept of freedom and empowerment, so that the positive feelings toward the concept transfer to the product. Emotional appeal, pathos. Bypassing rational calculation about health risks by tapping into the deeper, more powerful desires for identity, rebellion, and social progress. Bernays' genius was his understanding that the most effective persuasion is the persuasion you don't notice, you don't obey. You choose. You believe you are acting on your own desires, never realizing those desires were carefully engineered for you. Now here is where Bernays' crude but effective methods evolved into something far more sophisticated. The old model was a megaphone, one message to many people. Bernays could plant a story in a newspaper and hope it reached his target demographic. The new model is a neural network, many messages micro-targeted to individuals based on their digital footprints, psychological profiles, and behavioral patterns. Where Bernays had to guess what would motivate women or the middle class, today's architects of influence know your specific fears, desires, and cognitive biases. The algorithm doesn't just frame the message, it chooses which version of reality to show you entirely. Your social media feed becomes a personalized propaganda channel, so precisely calibrated to your psychology that it feels like a natural extension of your own thoughts. Ask yourself, when did you last encounter an idea that genuinely challenged your worldview in your daily digital consumption? Or have you been fed a steady diet of content that confirms what you already believe, making those beliefs feel more true and more universal than they actually are? The dialogue correctly points out that intelligence is no shield. In fact, it can be a weapon against your own objectivity. This is motivated reasoning, the use of intelligence to rationalize pre-existing beliefs and defend our tribal identity. The modern sage must be wary of this above all. You must ask yourself, am I using my intellect to seek truth or to defend my ego? Am I scrutinizing the arguments I disagree with the same ferocity that I apply to the arguments I favor? The great deception is not the lie. It is the flawless, emotionally resonant narrative built atop a selective arrangement of facts. It is the Jetsons presenting a future of flying cars that does nothing to challenge corporate power or gender roles. It is a vision of progress that is purely aesthetic, never structural. Now we must address the elephant in the room. If we truly applied Socratic questioning to every compelling narrative, every political argument, every advertisement that feels instantly true, we would be paralyzed. The cognitive burden would be crushing. This is the paradox of our current information environment. The cost of being fully informed and critically analytical might be psychological exhaustion, social isolation, and decision paralysis. Meanwhile, those who consume information uncritically seem more confident, more socially connected, and more decisive. So how do we navigate this? How do we maintain intellectual integrity without becoming cynical hermits, suspicious of every human interaction? The answer lies in understanding that critical thinking is not a permanent state of hypervigilance. It's a skill to be deployed strategically. Like a surgeon who doesn't perform surgery at dinner parties, the modern sage learns when to engage their analytical tools and when to allow themselves the luxury of trust, wonder, or simple enjoyment. The key is recognizing the high-stakes moments, when you're about to make a significant decision, when you feel unusually strong emotional reactions to information, when you're being asked to change your behavior or beliefs, or when something feels too perfectly aligned with what you already think. These are the moments for Socratic interrogation. These are the moments to pause and ask the deeper questions. So what is to be done? The answer is not to retreat from the world, but to arm yourself with a new set of tools. The tool of the question. When you encounter a compelling narrative, a political argument, an advertisement that feels instantly true, especially in those high-stakes moments we just identified, you must become your own Socrates. Interrogate it. Question the frame. How else could this information be presented? What is being emphasized, and more importantly, what is being omitted? If this were presented as a 20% failure rate instead of an 80% success rate, how would I feel about it? Identify the priming. What recent events or messages have made me more receptive to this idea? Am I being prepared to accept something? Have I been exposed to a pattern of stories that all point toward the same conclusion? Deconstruct the narrative. Is this a complex issue being forced into a simple good versus evil story? What is the false dilemma here? What nuances are being lost in this compelling story? Hunt for fallacies. Is this an appeal to emotion? A false authority? A slippery slope? Am I being asked to fear something, trust someone's credentials without verification, or believe that one small step will lead to catastrophic consequences? Challenge the language. What reality is this word or phrase trying to create? Who benefits from this particular definition? What would happen if I used different words to describe the same phenomenon? Check your tribe. Is this information telling me something flattering about my group and unflattering about the opposing group? Am I accepting this because it confirms my tribal identity rather than because it's well evidenced? But even these practical tools are not enough. The most profound defense against manipulation is not technique, it's character. It's cultivating the intellectual virtues that make you resistant to the architecture of influence. Intellectual humility, the recognition that you could be wrong, that your perspective is limited, that the world is more complex than any single viewpoint can capture. Curiosity over certainty, a genuine interest in understanding rather than winning arguments. The person who seeks to understand their opponent's strongest arguments rather than their weakest ones. Comfort with uncertainty. The ability to sit with not knowing, to resist the premature closure that makes us vulnerable to simple explanations for complex problems. These virtues cannot be taught through techniques alone. They must be practiced, cultivated through engagement with ideas that challenge you, through relationships with people who disagree with you, through the humbling experience of discovering you were wrong about something important. Your mind is the last truly common resource, and it is being mined for your consent every second of every day. The most profound obedience is the obedience you mistake for your own free will. But remember, the goal is not cynicism, but clarity. Not to believe nothing, but to understand why you believe what you believe. Not to become a hermit of suspicion, but to become a wise participant in the human conversation. The Socratic method at its heart is not about having answers. It's about living the questions. It's about maintaining that sense of wonder and uncertainty that keeps your mind open and your thinking flexible. Socrates himself claimed to know only that he knew nothing. In our age of information overload and manufactured certainty, this ignorance might be the wisest position of all. It keeps you learning. It keeps you questioning. It keeps you free. The conversation is over. The examined life begins now.